All right, as you're finishing up, we are going to be talking about aquatic ecosystems. So I'm going to ask a couple of you for your answers. So, Charlotte, what'd you get for watershed?
Watershed. Water.
Okay, so it's an area, it's an area of land that the water is draining into, and it's the entire area, it's the entire surrounding area that drains into one single lake or stream. So you might have like lots of different streams funneling into a big river like the Mississippi River. So the watershed would be all of the area that encompasses all of those rivers and streams. Autumn, what'd you get for a river basin? So a river basin is where it's going to collect, okay? So this is, it's a path that it flows down. A river basin is just an area where that water is going to collect before it empties into like the ocean, right? So we're talking about like the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River basin would be the Mississippi River where those streams are coming in and funneling in. It's kind of a tricky like difference between the two. Do you need to know the exact difference? No. We're just getting exposed to these different terms because you might see them, and I just need you to know roughly what they are for like an AP test. I don't necessarily need you to know the definition of these. And then an estuary. She is not here. Vinny P, what'd you get for an estuary? Okay, so once we get, right, exactly, once we get that water flowing into like the Mississippi River, well, eventually it's going to empty out into the ocean. Okay, so an estuary is where it meets, right, where the ocean and freshwater are going to meet, typically with a river. So estuaries are super important. They provide us with lots of different ecosystem services. Vince C, what did you get? Did you get any ecosystem services? Okay, so it supports diversity. So basically it provides habitat for other plants and animals. It gives them nutrients. What else? Anyone think of anything that's like not on here? Or anything else that's on here? So they also provide places for fish to grow up. They provide recreation. They provide income for fishermen, right, because they are able to catch fish. So all of these ecosystem services are things that wetlands provide us. Wetlands are a big topic that are on the AP exam. We'll talk more about them. Do you need to know exactly the definition of a watershed or a river basin? No. Estuary, I do want you to know, though, okay? So we're going to watch a little clip on wetlands, and this guy's a little weird, but there are lots of different types of wetlands. So we get marshes, swamps, bogs, and again, I just want to expose you to some different types of wetlands because they like to ask you questions about wetlands on the AP exam. Typically, they're not like, what makes this wetland that's different from this one? Typically, they're more like, what are the ecosystem services, or why are wetlands important? So we're going to watch this 4-minute clip. And again, this guy's like a little weird, but you know, weird videos help you remember them, right? All right, so wetlands provide a lot of different ecosystem services. What's the difference? What does a marsh have a lot of? What kind of plants? Grasses or leafy plants. What about a swamp? Trees. And then a bog is more, it's not connected to a larger body of water. So you'll hear about like cranberry bogs in Wisconsin, or it's just like a standing still body of water. It's kind of stagnant. You'll see a lot of algae, but it actually is really important soil. So we'll talk more about that when we get to our soil unit. So wetlands provide a lot of different services. They talked about them being fish preschools, about protecting the coasts from erosion. They also help filter water. So they do a lot of different things. So you're seeing some similarities here. You don't necessarily need to know the difference between like, oh, an estuary or a river basin or whatever. But as you continue, right, to see all the ecosystem services here, they all kind of overlap, right? So when in doubt, if you're doing a free response question and they're like, what ecosystem services does this aquatic whatever provide? You could be like, oh, hey, it provides habitat for fisheries, or like, you know, it provides income for fishermen. And so there's a lot of overlap there. So that's kind of what we're getting at, is having you practice like and understand that a lot of these ecosystem services do overlap. So what we're going to do, we're going to take some notes on terrestrial biomes, but before that, I did hand back your biome sheet that you guys did. So some of you guys had some, I don't know, some difficulties or didn't get quite exactly the answers that I wanted you to. So here's what you should have gotten from that biome sheet. In the temperate regions, so temperate were the top 3 graphs, in the temperate regions, you should have seen that the temperature goes up and down a lot, right? Because there's a summer season and a winter season. That's the temperate is like the zone that we're in, okay? The rain is generally constant-ish, okay? In tropics, it's the opposite, right? The temperature remains relatively stable, but the rainfall increases and decreases because they have a wet season and a dry season, all right? The chaparral down below, okay, that was a really sucky map, so generally it's found along the coast, but it was really hard to see that from this map. So they're found along the coast, and if you know anything about the coast, that water helps insulate the temperature from really extreme temperatures, okay? So, for example, we live in Kenosha. If you go towards the lake and it's like in the winter, it's generally a little bit warmer by the lake. The reason being is because the lake is actually warmer than the air temperature. So the lake insulates the temperature and it makes it a little warmer, all right? In Kenosha, it's significantly warmer. It's usually about 10 degrees warmer in the winter here than like in Madison, because Madison's not next to a big, huge Lake Michigan. In the summer, though, Kenosha is about 10 degrees cooler than Madison. Why? Because, well, in the summer, the lake is cooler than the air, and so we end up getting a cooling effect from the lake, and so the lake cools down this weather. So the chaparral, we see, kind of fits the tropical pattern, even though it's not in the tropics. And the reason being is because it's by a big body of water, and that big body of water helps prevent as extreme fluctuations in temperature. All right. Okay, so that being said, we're going to talk about terrestrial biomes, okay? All right, so you need your note packet, terrestrial biomes. Just a reminder, we have a test on Thursday. I am holding a review session, 2 of them, tomorrow night from 6 to 7 online, okay? The link will be on Classroom. I'll send it out on Remind. I won't do it until actually like the time for the review, because you can't really make them ahead of time. And then there will be a review session. We have conferences on Wednesday and Thursday. So I will be here after school from 3 to 4 on Wednesday. If you want to come hang out and do your review or work on your review or ask me questions or have me teach you stuff or have me check your review, anything like that, I'm more than happy to do that. So terrestrial biomes are large regions characterized by temperature, precipitation, and then also plant growth. Okay, we said the 2 main factors influencing climate are temperature and precipitation. When we end up going to aquatic biomes, that changes a little bit. Okay, here we see temperature, precipitation. Anyone remember what we characterize aquatic biomes by? What makes like a river different from a pond? Water flow, right? So how fast is the water moving? And then what makes a river or what makes a pond or a lake different from the ocean? Salinity, so the amount of salt, okay? So water flow and salinity, and then also depth, okay? So those are the things, because climate you know, if we're talking about precipitation, it doesn't really matter for aquatic ecosystems. So terrestrial biomes are large areas characterized by temperature, precipitation, and then plants is the big thing. So there's different types of plants, and you guys have seen that, like in the desert, okay, we don't have the same kind of plants as we do here in Wisconsin. So they have different adaptations to help them adapt. Now, biomes are not generally like tested a ton on the AP exam. And I think one of the reasons is just because there's so many different names. I touched on that a little bit on Thursday. There's so many different names for these biomes, like people call them different things. And so it can get kind of confusing. And not all scientists group or categorize biomes the same way. So I think that's one of the reasons. So we're just going to write down the main points for each biome. And you don't need to memorize everything about a biome. You guys have those grid sheets, those graphic organizers, as reference, okay? But do not spend your time memorizing those, okay? You just need to know the general trends, all right? So for the tundra, here is where we have permafrost, okay? Tundra is where we have permafrost, and we'll watch a video clip on what the heck permafrost is, but basically it's frozen soil. So the soil, about a couple feet down, is really frozen, and it's frozen all year long. And it holds dead plant and animal material, and it hasn't fully decomposed. So what scientists are afraid of is that when this permafrost starts to thaw because of climate change, it's going to release all of these greenhouse gases because all of the stuff is going to decompose and it's going to release these greenhouse gases. Okay. Now, because it has permafrost, it can't have tall plants either. We don't see like giant trees in the Arctic. Okay. The reason being is because they can't actually anchor their roots in that soil. So they can only have really shallow roots, and so if we needed like big plants with really deep roots, they can't get through that frozen soil. All right, so permafrost, like whatever you have to do, because they're like obsessed with permafrost on the AP exam. We'll watch a clip about that tomorrow. All right, boreal forest. You'll hear this called the taiga. Here we have coniferous trees. What's a conifer? A coniferous tree. Pine trees. Okay, yeah, pine trees. So if you don't know that this is a pine tree, you better write pine. Okay. So this is cold. This is like, think Canada, but not like North Pole. And we're going to be talking about soil because these different biomes have different soil types. I don't need you to memorize every single biome that has like what kind of soil it has, but I need you to know patterns. So here's the pattern. All right. In order for us to get good soil, we have to have stuff decomposing. Okay. Think about food, right? When food molds or rots, it's decomposing. So what kinds of conditions, if you wanted something to mold really, really fast, where would you put it? Yeah, someplace that's hot, right? So instead of putting it like in the freezer it'll last forever, right? Or pretty long. It's not going to mold there. In the fridge, it'll last some time. On your counter, right, especially on a warm summer day, it's going to mold really fast. And especially if there's moisture, okay? Because we know that people like dehydrate stuff. Like think about like raisins. Raisins last for a really long time as compared to grapes because raisins have all that moisture taken out of them. Same thing for soil, okay? In order for stuff to decompose into good soil, we have to have it warm and we have to have some water, okay? Now, if we look at these pine trees, anyone have a pine tree in their yard? And how well does grass grow right underneath the pine tree? It doesn't, right? So pine trees have really acidic needles, okay? And because of that, they make the soil really acidic and it doesn't make any other plants happy. So because we get lots of pine trees up here, we don't have really good soil and stuff doesn't grow super well. Not to mention it's cold, right? So our soil's not that great because we don't get a ton of decomposition. All right, temperate rainforests. So temperate, this means like up in the U.S. area, right? It's not by the equator. You may be like, well, Ms. Frankson, I don't know a rainforest up in the U.S. Well, we do. Okay, think about where it's really rainy. The Pacific Northwest, if you don't know where that is, right? Oregon and Washington. Okay, so Oregon and Washington, if you've ever read Twilight, she lives out in, I think it's Oregon, right? It's rainy all the time there, right? Okay, so temperate rainforest. So super rainy. They are by the coast, so they're going to have like a rainy season and a dry season, and their temperatures are going to be a little bit not as extreme, okay? Now, you might be like, well, why do they have poor soil? Well, here's the thing. If they get too much rain, if they get a ton of rain, all the rain washes all of those nutrients out of the soil, right? We talked about leaching, okay? So this is what happens here. So it does not have very good soil. All right, temperate seasonal forest. You'll hear these called like deciduous forest. Again, this is just our regular forest. Think about the forest we have here, like woods in Wisconsin, okay, that have oak trees and maple trees and whatnot. So temperate seasonal forest, they're very productive. Okay, we talked about net primary productivity. They're really productive. They have really good soil. We have good growing seasons. It's usually warm-ish around here. Now, not in the winter, but. And so because they have pretty good soil here, we oftentimes get these forests converted to agricultural land. Okay, so a lot of times people will clear-cut forests and convert them to agricultural lands. All right, the last one we're going to talk about on this page is like the woodland or shrubland. This is a picture. It's also the chaparral. Again, it's got like 500 different names. We find this like in California. It's like, these are just like scrubby bushes, okay? You can call it like a scrubland or shrubland. In California or like the Mediterranean, I would just honestly, I would not write that. I would just say California and the Mediterranean. It does get a substantial amount of rain, so it doesn't have super awesome soil. Okay, good. So now we're going to go on to the next set here. And then we're going to see if you guys can match some of them. All right, so the next one, you'll see this called a cold desert or temperate grassland. Okay, just think of it as grassland, prairie, basically. All right, again, there's a million different names you can call these. Think of it as grassland or prairie. So part of your job, like if you were to see this on an AP exam or something, is to like decode these names. Temperate, okay, so you know it's not in the tropics. So it's probably going to have warm temperatures and cold temperatures, right? And it's a grassland, so it's going to be mostly grass. Okay, so you're decoding these different names. So the grassland, think of the Great Plains. They have fires. Those are normal. So on prairies, it's normal to have fires. Okay, and the reason fires are good is because they destroy the trees. The plants, the prairie plants, have really, really long roots, and so when fire comes through, they just regrow because their roots aren't affected. Trees, however, end up dying when the fire goes through. So over time, all the prairies will be converted into forest if there aren't fires. So again, they have pretty good soil. So the two biomes that we have widely spread across the U.S., right, the grassland and the temperate forest, have really good soil, right? And as a result, they're oftentimes converted to agricultural lands, which is why we get a lot of that in the Midwest and throughout the U.S. All right, tropical rainforest, okay? So we have a rainy and a dry season for the rainforest, okay? Super productive because it's warm. Things can grow all year round. Nutrient-poor soil. You might think it has really good nutrients because it's really warm and it's wet. But here's the problem. The nutrients actually recycle faster. They cycle too fast. Okay? And so the plants actually take up the nutrients right away, and it doesn't leave a whole lot of nutrients left in the soil. So it's the most biodiverse ecosystem. What's the most biodiverse aquatic ecosystem? Coral reef. Okay, good. So they like to talk a lot on the AP exams about the coral reefs, tropical rainforests. They like to talk about diversity. So those kinds of things are things you'll see a lot of. You don't usually see like, hey, what is this biome? All right, that's just not something you typically see on an AP exam. All right, next up, we have savanna. This is a picture of a savanna. Okay, think Africa. This is when I was in Africa. It was all dry and gross, and it pretty much looked like this, and it was really dusty. In the wet season, although, it looks really pretty and like a normal place. Okay, so two different things, wet and dry. If you think about Africa as like that big open savanna, it's like a big grassland, right? And occasionally you see those like African trees, right, with the elephants and whatever. That's a tropical seasonal forest, or again, we also call it a savanna. You can just call it a savanna. But again, if you were given this, like on an AP exam, right, and they're talking about tropical seasonal forests, which they probably wouldn't, but if they were tropical, okay, you know there's probably a wet and a dry season, right? So seasonal, that makes sense. And it's a forest, so there's going to be some trees, okay? So this is typically a grassy area, and then there are some trees. And then last but not least, desert. So very little rain. It's found at 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. All right, so the very last thing we're going to write down are just a couple takeaway points. So again, we need some trends in here that we're talking about. So patterns here, okay? Here's what I would write down. I would write down these two things, okay? We talked about how soil quality is best where decomposition can occur kind of quickly. So good soil quality. The ones that have the best soil quality are the two that we have here in the U.S., okay? The temperate seasonal forest, like the regular forest, and then the grassland. Which ones have the highest productivity? We have tropical rainforest, and then the temperate seasonal forest, which again is like the forests that we have here. So forests have pretty good productivity. Not the taiga forests, though. Those are up north. It's too cold for them to have good productivity. But forests generally have high productivity. So I want to show you this diagram here. This is like primary productivity. You've seen a diagram similar to this. I can put this back down if you need it in a second to keep copying. This is going to be really blurry. But if you see, so terrestrial ecosystems, so they qualify swamps and marshes here as terrestrial. So swamps and marshes, along with the rainforest, are the most productive, okay? Meaning they're producing the most amount of new stuff, like basically new vegetation. Then we get temperate forests, then we get northern coniferous forest, okay? So forests, so swamps and marshes and forests are most productive. Aquatic ecosystems, estuaries, okay? So these would include some of those marshes as well, right? The estuaries are going to be the most productive, and then we get, lakes and streams, open ocean, okay? So that's why estuaries are really important, along with tropical rainforests, swamps, and marshes, okay? All right, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to hand out your review. We're going to do the back page together. It's matching these graphs to the biomes. So what I need you to do is get 2 colors so you can draw the temperature and precipitation lines on here. And you can work with somebody. Basically, I give you 3 choices, okay? 3 choices for these biomes. And you have to decide which diagram is showing which of those biomes. So I'll put the pictures up on the board so you can copy down the correct lines so you can color the lines. And then if you want to work with somebody, if you get done with the backside, go on to a different page. You can start working on another page in the review. We'll go over the answers towards the end of class. All right, so here are your lines that you're going to want to copy down. I can move them down in a second. So if you're watching this on notes, you can just pause the video wherever you need it. All right, let's go over the answers. So here's how you figure these out. So on the top one here, okay, we have tundra, grassland, temperate, rainforest. So we know the tundra is the coldest, right? So we need to look at the red temperature line, right? So this is the middle one, right? The tundra, the coldest. It also doesn't get a lot of rain, okay? Now we have to decide between grassland and temperate rainforest, okay? So with the temperate rainforest, remember this is the Pacific Northwest, so it's going to have kind of a rainy season and dry season. So the temperate rainforest would be the one on the right, and then the grassland would be the one on the left. So from left to right, we should have grassland, tundra, temperate rainforest. Next one, we have savanna, chaparral, and desert, right? Desert is the warmest, but also the least amount of precipitation, right? So the first one here is the desert. And then we have to decide between savanna and chaparral, okay? So the savanna is the one over here that has a really big peak, right? Because the wet and the dry season here. So this precipitation curve is showing you that there's a really big wet and dry season. It also makes sense because the chaparral is in like a tropical region. So it's going to have not as much fluctuation in temperature. All right, there's the bell. The last ones, if you want to check your answers, are rainforest. Then we have taiga and temperate seasonal.